morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm James Hansen, Group Publisher of Federal and Technology Markets at GovExec and Vice President with NextGov. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, Modernizing the Mission, the Future of Federal Financial Service Modernization, hosted by Red Hat and produced by GovExec. The combination of recent cyber attacks and the sudden transition to a hybrid workforce has driven our federal financial service agencies into the spotlight. As these organizations continue to provide essential services amidst sudden changes and paradigm shifts in the way they work, the need to modernize is critical to delivering the mission. Joining me today to discuss this further is a great panel. It is my pleasure to welcome Tanya Johnson, Deputy Chief Financial Officer and Director of the Office of Financial Management at the Department of the Interior. Howard Spearer, Chief Information Officer at U.S. Export-Import Bank. Kashit Pandya, Deputy Chief Information Officer for IT Operations at the Internal Revenue Service. And Dr. Richard Harmon, Vice President of Global Head of Financial Services at Red Hat. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I think it's going to be a great conversation, especially because all of you come from agencies with different missions, scopes, and sizes. So to kick us off, can each of you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about your agency and your role in delivering IT modernization? Tanya, let's start with you.
Thank you. Working at the Department of Interior is vast. We have so many different initiatives and missions. As you know, we have 11 different bureaus that work for under the Department of Interior. They include the National Parks Service. So we go from everything from parks and monuments to Bureau of Land Management, managing the land for the government throughout the United States, as well as dealing with Indian Affairs, a U.S. Geological Survey that deals with the weather. And we've had some incidents with weather lately, as well as fish and wildlife, just to name a few. So our mission is, I should say, it extends across a lot of different areas, which keeps us pretty busy, keeps me pretty busy, as well as dealing with oil and gas. As a lot of you may know, if you saw the movie Deep Horizon, two of the agencies that came up out of that are at Department of Interior, and that came from that. So we deal with a lot of different things. And of course, fraud and new technology plays a big role in us moving forward. So that is a little background about us. It's about $92 billion worth of assets that we manage. And so it's a huge portfolio. And it comes with some challenges sometimes because we're not specific in one form. We're not like some of the other agencies that have just one function or one mission, and that's their mission. Our missions consist of different areas because of the different bureaus. So that is a little bit about us. I didn't know if you wanted me to expand a little bit more, but it kind of gives you just a little insight to some of the things that we do.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tanya. It is, and it's disparate, right? It's across the country, and I imagine that 92 billion takes quite a lot to manage from a financial budget procurement perspective, and having those systems in place are critical. Kashit, I'm going to jump to you next. Do you mind just providing, I think most people are familiar with the IRS, or if they haven't, then that may be an issue that we need to address. But just talk a little bit about your role in supporting IRS and the team there and the taxpayer.
Absolutely. Thank you. And good morning again. Again, as you said, I think we are all familiar with the IRS. The IRS's mission really quickly is to ensure that we provide top quality service by helping everyone meet their tax responsibility and applying the tax law with fairness and integrity. Again, we collect trillions of dollars in tax revenue. About 90 to 95% of the government is funded through the IRS. So, that's a significant amount of funding that the IRS provides. And our current numbers For every dollar we collect, we are able to provide up to $5 to $7 in return for the U.S. government. So a huge role IRS has within the nation, within the country, and really more, to help the taxpayers as a whole and help the country as a whole. I'm the Deputy Chief Information Officer for IT operations. My role, and it really depends on, from hour to hour, sometimes it feels, but really entails overseeing all of our operations. We have, tens of thousands of servers. We are responsible for, let's say, 10, 20 petabytes of data, multiple data centers. We have just IT alone has about 7,500 IT employees. And then if we add in contractors, we're looking at about 12 to 13,000. So the IT team is made up of about nearly 12 to 13,000 individuals, helping in operations and driving on that. In addition to that, I am responsible for planning and then executing filing season. Whether it's a normal one or extended ones like the ones we've had the last couple of years. And last but not least, I am also responsible for overseeing any and all legislation such as the Affordable Care Act, legislation such as the CARES Act that came out last year with the pandemic, the new American Rescue Plan, the child tax credit. All of those areas, all of that legislation falls under me. So that's why I said, depending on the hour of the day, I'm wearing a different hat.
Yeah, and we're going to get into kind of the, pre and post the last couple of years, and really, the scale that has, been needed within your organization to be able to deliver on that. Howard, let's shift to you next and tell us a little bit about the U.S. Export-Import Bank, its mission, and your role in supporting it.
Great, thank you for the question, James. First of all, XM is an independent executive branch agency, and its mission is to support American jobs by facilitating the export of U.S. goods and services. Basically, what XM does is it assumes the credit and country risk that the private sector is unable or unwilling to accept. So we're kind of a unique animal within the federal collection. First of all, I would say we are 100% commercial, so no one interacts with the XM Bank unless they want to, and they feel that the products and services that we offer are worth the fees that we charge. And then second, we look very much like a commercial or investment bank, but often work with commercial banks to put together total packages for our customers. Most folks may understand some of our big customers that you hear about, the Boeings, the General Electrics, the SpaceX, as being some of the most sophisticated American exporters. But we also have thousands of small entrepreneurial businesses in the United States that also export, that we have products and facilitate their export activity. So it's a unique mission, and it's a great place to be. My role, I'm the Chief Information Officer here at XM, so I'm in charge of the entire technology portfolio, from cybersecurity to infrastructure to the mission applications that run that we use to run XM. And we manage a book of business that right now is a little over $40 billion worth, and a very interesting time. So working our way through the pandemic.
And Howard, how many employees do you have on your staff and or supporting, just to provide some scale in terms of, while the portfolio that you are supporting is vast, is just looking in terms of like resources and how important technology really is to achieving that?
Sure. Well, we are a boutique agency, so total number of souls on board, staff and contractors, is somewhere between 500 and 600. And then the total size of the IT capability, including contract staff, runs between 80 and 100, depending on what projects that we're working on at any point in time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I just wanted to show again what I had mentioned, like the vastness of, the approach that you take from the resources that you have, and while the IRS needs even more resources than it already has a huge number. So we'll get into a little bit of that, but I just think it's a unique kind of comparison to make. Richard, can you tell us about, like, in terms of one, your role at Red Hat, but the types of customers that you guys are supporting from a global financial market perspective?
Thanks for that. So my role at Red Hat is overseeing our global financial services business. It represents about a quarter of Red Hat's total revenue. It's our largest industry vertical. We also have, I think it's somewhere approximately about 3,700 customers globally. The top 100 Fortune financial service firms are all customers of ours. And Red Hat is it's the world leading provider of enterprise open software solutions. We're over 25 years old. And we do that sort of through, it's all open source, right? So it's all community, sort of a community-based approach, to innovating in terms of technology. So it's not just Red Hat as a single firm. There's just a global community that contributes, innovative technologies and capabilities. And we bring those into an enterprise scale for, particularly federal institutions, to leverage where it's relevant. So we're all about supporting open source communities globally as well.
Let's snake back the other way for our first question and start with you, Richard. In looking at your customers and how you're supporting, and looking at just all of the modernization and digital transformation efforts that are being undertaken by the agencies that we have here, but just across the global financial market, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing in terms of finance modernization, whether that be technical, whether that be outside influences and assets and things that need to be modernized in order for us to achieve better mission outcomes?
Yeah, and I think obviously the scale of the Department of Interior and IRS, they have a tremendous amount of challenges, as the study sort of highlighted a little in terms of legacy modernization. But I think modernization is going across the globe and across all industries. And I do spend a lot of time with central banks and regulators. So they have similar challenges as the rest of the U.S. federal government has. But I think fundamentally, it's about modernizing to a certain extent technology, and it's about the ability of sort of reimagining processes, that are much more agile, flexible, dynamic, event-driven. So it's because it supports sort of a digital capability that particularly in the commercial side and the private sector is a huge focus and investment area. But also modernization, and I'm sure the wonderful experts here will agree, it's also about changing the internal culture of this professional staff, because one of the things within the way technology is advancing is there's continuous change. It's not whether we go from one project to the next, it's just a continuous innovation and acceleration of what we're doing. So I think that's a challenge for any institution, regardless of their public sector or private sector. That cultural challenge and change management is probably, in some sense, the biggest challenge for success as institutions try to modernize.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Howard, going to you next. What are some of the finance modernization initiatives that you guys have undertaken? What are some of the challenges around that? And why don't we take that in two questions? One, kind of pre-pandemic, were there any kind of large challenges? What are some challenges in modernizing that the pandemic brought on? And, to that extent, did it accelerate, improve, worsen some of those challenges that you may have been experiencing beforehand?
Sure. Well, let me try to address that. So first, from a focus perspective, I think there are kind of three things that we keep our eyes on. One is what is our customer experience? Uh, Two, what's our staff experience? And then what are the activities that we use to breed credibility and trust? Because as a financial services entity, it's fundamentally about credibility and trust. People don't do business in financial services with entities that they don't have credibility and that don't build credibility and trust. So from the customer experience, we want our product to be modern, simple, easy to use. And within the portfolio of products that we have, all of the products that we have are actually instantiated in technology. So it's not like we've got a plant that's manufacturing widgets. Any financial product is inherently a technology product. So within our portfolio of products, we have one space where that I would describe as legacy, and we're actively working on a project now to replace the final legacy product that we have. And it would have a lot of features that I think Dr. Hansen referred to, very workflow driven, very case driven, very event driven. And we've brought that to most of our products except one piece of the portfolio that we're going to be finishing up. But like I said, because we're dealing with folks on a commercial basis, they expect that when we represent ourselves to them, that we have the same capabilities that they would expect to see if they're dealing with any of the large commercial banks that also operate in this space. So we have to have a kind of a customer experience parity to have credibility and trust. And very similarly on the staff basis, in order to staff an organization like this, we often have folks who come from the private sector to join us. And we have to be able to, again, have parity with processing. I think one of the challenges that we've been focusing on the staff experience is that we've actually, I think, modernized that from a technical perspective faster than our staff's ability to sort of uptake all the change that has come at them. And so one of the things that we're focusing on the staff experience is what do we need to do in terms of outreach? What do we need to do in terms of development to actually take advantage of all of the capabilities that we have given staff over the last 24 months between Teams, collaboration tools, SharePoint, OneDrive, the amount of capability the average employee has versus what they're able to exploit, I think represents a significant gap that we want to get focused around. And then the last piece is building that credibility and trust. And there isn't anybody here who would, I think, disagree that the concerns about cybersecurity have taken a significant hockey stick sort of upturn over the last 12 months. So we're looking at really paradigm shifting approaches that allow us to manage all the complexity of cybersecurity. So one of the big initiatives we have is moving from virtualization of the backend, which we've substantially completed, to virtualization of the desktop to be able to manage a desktop in this rapidly moving cyber world. We feel that we have to kind of change the paradigm to be able to manage that with the size staff that we have. We have to simplify the management approach. So VDI and a lot of paying attention to not only the cyber hygiene, but the new executive order. So one of the questions you asked is, what was it looking like pre-pandemic and post-pandemic? From a certain perspective, that perspective actually hasn't changed. What's changed is sort of the time compression that we're expected to address that. So for example, we were looking at zero trust, and we were thinking that was maybe a 2 to 3 year out implementation pre-pandemic. And now you're looking at the executive order on cybersecurity, and they want to see zero trust coming today, now, this year, next year. So we've seen a lot of that move in. The other thing that we've seen is the ability to manage that workforce in a hybrid environment, which is also related to VDI. These are also initiatives that we've accelerated. So that's a little bit about how we're looking at it at XM.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that background, which moves me over to Kashid. I mean, I can't imagine. I remember last year when everything really started to explode in March and April, which was right in the heart of tax season. So I know the pandemic has had a huge impact on you guys. But then to your point that you were making earlier, all this additional stimulus money that has come through. So from your perspective, how have things changed? What are the biggest challenges? How has it accelerated? I mean, I think your story is an extremely unique one, and you guys have handled it extremely well.
Oh, thank you, first of all, for that. Yeah, just a quick background. I came to the IRS about 8 years ago. I was working in the private industry. Prior to that, held various executive positions in multinational companies. But I'm here and I've been here for 8 years. And I share this with my own team. In the private industry, I would stay with a company for 2-3 years. Max was 4. I'm here for 8 and looking forward to many, many years more. The reason being how dedicated our people are to the mission. It's just been an impressive display of their dedication and focus to deliver and help the American taxpayers, the American constituents. And that continues to keep me excited, motivated, and just an honor to be part of this team. So we experience incredible challenges, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. I'm not even sure if we're quite post-pandemic yet, but certainly where we are today. Scope and complexity has always been a challenge, the pandemic or no pandemic. Anything and everything we do and touches on our 600 plus applications. It touches on the multiple ecosystem that we have that has every possible component you can think of, every language you can think of. I mentioned earlier we have 15 to 20,000 servers, multiple data centers, cloud footprint. Oftentimes, what you'll hear, unfortunately, associated with the IRS is we operate from Kennedy era systems, and that's it's not true by any means. We have some systems that we have built and are currently operating that were developed using COBOL. COBOL was introduced in the 60s, and therefore people associate that language and us using that language as us having a system that is using, from Kennedy era. All of our systems are modern, infrastructure is modern. So what are our challenges? Our challenge, as I mentioned, is scope and complexity. We want to and are aggressively migrating from COBOL to Java. We are looking to use and utilize the modern programming languages. But again, when we look at our ecosystem and I look at my 600 applications, changing one isn't an option, right? Because of how many dependencies it has before, the applications that come or provide its input into that application and how many applications are now pulling information from that application. So the upstream, downstream has an impact. And that complexity requires us to thoroughly evaluate and assess how we address any application or how we address modernization. We cannot operate it in a silo because we don't operate it in a silo. And at the same time, we have to ensure that we are minimizing, if not outright eliminating, any disruption to the taxpayers. We cannot simply take modernized e-file, which is used for everyone to file their taxes, or majority of them are used offline for a year, and say, everybody go back to filing paper while we modernize e-file. Not an option. We have to do all of these things in parallel, test, iterate, and then deploy with, again, minimal disruption to the taxpayers. So modernization, while we are aggressively pursuing it, we have it highlighted in our 2019 modernization plan, 6-year plan to modernize across the board, everything from operations to focus on customer service, focus on our internal infrastructure. It takes 6 years for us to address and tackle a lot of these areas because of the complexity. Add in on top of that new legislation that comes our way. We were not, American Rescue Plan, right? Coming into this year, that was something that had been probably discussed on the Hill, but not necessarily to the extent of what it will include. American Families Plan is another one we're keeping our eyes on. It's coming. We don't know the level of complexity. We don't know what it will require. The child tax credit was something that was introduced in March, along with the American Rescue Plan. The child tax credit required us to develop and deploy a portal to allow individuals to come in and unenroll, change their bank account information, provide IRS with. We had between March and June to develop and deploy that. Mind you, we were in the middle of filing season. And in addition to that, everything else we're doing. So the complexity and the scope of everything we are tackling concurrently always plays a role in everything we are trying to do and want to do. What has the pandemic changed for us? I would say it's accelerated our focus on digital transformation. Digital transformation, which entails, digitization and digitalization. What we clearly recognize, and while we cannot mandate everybody file electronically, what we realize is that we need to do improve how we provide our our customers, our taxpayers, an ability to engage with us in a digital manner. That includes everything from creating an account so that you can check, your notices, you can opt in to receive notices, you can eliminate as much of paper as you want, similar to what we are probably used to in our personal lives with our banks or even, cable service providers, et cetera. So we want to increase our online presence. That's key for us. Digital transformation also is, while we cannot force people to operate solely digitally, what we can do is take everything that is coming to us in a paper format and convert it digitally within the IRS. Right? So we want to eliminate the trailer loads of paper that's sitting at our campuses because, again, safety of our employees was paramount for this during this time. But that did not prevent the backup and the buildup of all of that paper that people are accustomed to using and sending. So we want to take that, see how we can now digitize all of that so that it provides two things. One, it allows the individuals who still prefer to operate in newspaper to continue doing so. Internally, however, it allows us to not only convert it to digital format, it frees us up from being location based, so that we're not saying people have to go into this location or this campus to access this information. And then it allows us to extract information from that digital transformation to now apply those metrics to determine what are those cases for efficiencies. So all of these things are I would say, the pandemic has touched on. A lot of what Howard touched on, I almost wanted to say ditto, because we are heavily, and I would say focused very much so on what we are saying is total experience. That includes the customer experience, that includes the employee experience. We want to expand how customers are able to engage and interact with us. So everything from the omni-channel, you can call in, you can chat with us online, you can call in, we have customer callback, so you're not waiting for someone, an agent, we can call you back. Similarly, internally, we are focused on increasing and improving the skill sets of our employees. Technology, as we all know, changes rapidly. We want to ensure that our teams are able to keep up with it through the training. So total experience focuses on external and internal improvements with a heavy focus on improving how people operate. We are not quite certain what the future holds from, will we be fully teleworking or remote working? Will there be a middle ground? Will we go back? Nonetheless, we have to build for that future of operate anywhere. And that's where our focus is. We've shifted and now deployed things such as Zoom. We're migrating to Teams. We are migrating our email to M365. It really is to help free us up from having to be so bound by a location. So digital transformation and total experience, which includes customer and user experience.
Do you sleep, Kushi? That is, as a taxpayer, all I can say is thank you for your service. That is quite, to your point, the complexity and scope of all of those things combined is very challenging to even wrap my head around. Tanya, from your perspective as a line of business owner and a mission owner in the Office of Financial Management, can you talk a little bit about some of the modernization efforts? I'd love to hear how you work with the CIO and IT shops, and what are some of the processes and governance models that need to come along with some of the modernization efforts that you guys are undertaking.
Okay, so great. So one of the things that I want to share is that I originally came from OPM. So I was there when OPM had the breach. I was instrumental in setting up the background, the identity theft with DoD when the 22 million people were affected with that. So I left. I was the associate CFO at that time at OPM. And so we had to set up 22 million, the background investigation, how we were going to get that paid, that whole scenario. It was two different incidents, one was 4 million people were affected, another one was 22 million. So fast forward, now I'm at Department of the Interior. I came in 2019. And after learning some of the ins and outs at OPM, which is it was a huge hit to us from the department wise. We had to do 10-year, provide identity theft protection to all the and monitoring oversight to all federal and contractors or whoever were impacted. So coming to DOI was a huge change. One, we were on Google Docs at the time, so we did not have the technology in place, but also understanding the impact to what an incident like that could have on us. DOI has 70,000 employees. We're spread across 12 different regions, so we're a little bit everywhere. So you can probably find some DOI employees in everywhere. And when you think about National Park Service and just its context, you can imagine how big it is, the systems that we have and so forth. So one of the things that I came in with was that we needed to change how we operate. Everyone operated in silos. So if some incident happened at National Park Service, maybe U.S. Geological Service did not know about it from a technology aspect. Everybody had their own technology. So one of my key initiatives when I first arrived was working closely with the CIO office, just trying to understand overall what are some of the technologies we have. What's different about DOI than a lot of agencies is that the accounting system is not really managed by CIO. We have our own internal CIO within the Budget, Finance, Grants, and Acquisitions division. And so working closely with them to just trying to understand all of these silos. So one of the things that I initially did, and we continue to do, is that, we make sure that everything runs through my office, because I wear two hats. I wear the deputy CFO hat, as well as the director of Office of Financial Management. The Office of Financial Management works more so as policy and oversight, whereas the deputy CFO, I'm operating under the CFO Act and FMFIA and so many different other regulations. So one of the biggest things that I wanted to see was all the different technology that we have, because, we're not talking to each other. Maybe there are resources out there that we can collaborate on and make sure we get together. First few months in, and we were hit by a fraud incident, $1.8 million fraud incident. And so these were some of the things that, I was trying to, get people to get on board with. And, change management is never good. In the beginning, should I say that everyone wants to fight and no one thinks it will happen to them. And so we lost $1.8 million to someone that attacked us. And this is before COVID now. This is all before COVID that happened to us. And we lost the money and we were not able to get it back. It's still on an investigation and we're still working. But one of the key things that we realized is that our systems were outdated. We did not have the right technology. We did not have the right things in place. And one of the major problems is no one talked to each other. All the bureaus operated in silos. So one of the huge lifts that I did was I initiated a CFO council within the department. And so this required all bureau CFOs and I to meet, and we talk about not only technology, but controls and segregation of duties and things that need to happen within the department to move us forward. And so all of this took place, like I said, I came in June 2019. So what happened, next year was COVID. And so when COVID happened, we had just moved, like maybe 30 days, 40 days to Office 365, which made it much more better for us to communicate. And so we've been successful in communicating I don't have the rush hour and the time, but we had to put things in place. We still have to put things in place. One of the major things that we had to change is we had to change how we looked at financial management. We took this year and we initiated a financial management training, from audits to controls to we pulled CIO in, and CIO collaborated, and we did it across Department of Interior. It's the first time we did a all interior training where we offer over 60 workshops. We shut down for a week and we offer over 60 workshops. CIO partnered with us, and they came in and they, provided some new technologies and things, how we would move forward. And, if you needed assistance with Office 365, the different tools you could use. And so we partnered with them into doing that. One of the things that we announced and I established was a fraud awareness training. And so what we have now is we didn't have before was a fraud awareness training. There have been several incidents where, people have tried to compromise people's payroll. So they take their checks. We've had an incident because we are a service provider. We also provide payroll services. Our Interior Business Center provide payroll services to several different agencies. And so in that, they're vulnerable. So making sure that we have the right technology has been key. It still is a key. CIO and I are now partner with the CFO and the CIO Council. The American Rescue Plan and Identity Theft that Biden just issued earlier this year is one of the huge initiatives that he's pushing forward to making sure that we have different controls and different systems in place to kind of catch and monitor this. Because when you start thinking about this in context, if your information is being compromised as an individual, so it affects your clearance, it affects other things. So how do we protect our employees? How do we protect anybody that's out there? And so one of the things that we're doing is we set up the fraud awareness training. We're trying to make it a requirement no different than ethics. So it's certain things that we look out for when we get emails. First of all, the security mechanism. The incident that happened to us where we lost 1.8 million, it was one letter change in the email address. So they just transposed the digit. You wouldn't have normally caught it. So that training, you go in and you take the training. It's a certain requirement for all financial management employees now. And so we're broadening it to managers and to supervisors and executives. And now the next step is the secretary signing off and making it a requirement, no different than the ethics training that we take, and making it a requirement that everybody understand what fraud looks like. Because, fraud looks different depending on where you are and where you sit at Department of Interior. Some of the things in the technologies that we were using may be obsolete now. We're moving and we're working with FM Quizmo, which is Treasury, and updating our accounting system to S4HANA, SAP 4HANA. So with S4HANA, it's going to provide us more security than what we've used before. And I think COVID has helped that in the fact that everybody is ready to move forward. We're not in the office. When would all of us be back in the office? I don't know, because Department of Interior has a very, great telework policy. They have probably one of the most relaxed telework policy in government. Even before COVID, individuals only had to come in 2 days a pay period. And so that's not going to change much. So when we went to COVID, it really wasn't that much change except for moving to Office 365. But how can we protect each other? How can we make sure that we have these things that are in place? It sets to the mind of change management. Change management is really the key, and people moving from working in silos and communicating the different challenges. We can learn from each other better that way. Like I said, CIO and my staff are working closely. We're working with the council to develop how we can put some payment security, some payment security around some of the things that we're doing. So when we know we're paying federal assistance or grants, awards out, we're ensuring that we pay it to the right individuals. We know FEMA was hit with several different incidents where, you know, people falsified information, you know, and they were able, and all the criteria looked legit. So what can we do differently? And so we're exploring that now with CIO. We're on the council with that. I think we just turned in something I think it was last Thursday, working with that with the CIO council. So this is probably the beginning of more things to come. I think the major thing that we're doing is we're separating things out. I also did a reorg within my division. I had my audit team as well as my internal control and risk management all together. I separated them. I wanted my internal control, risk management, and fraud team to be able to go out and do assessments, to be able to look at systems, to see where we're vulnerable at, to see if what things we can put in place to kind of help that and mitigate the risk. Can we stop everything? No, but I think we can put better controls in. We can look at what systems are not working, what systems are outdated. And these are things that we were not doing before. So I do think COVID has helped us in that aspect because people are more aware. I think the fraud incident where we lost the 1.8, almost $1.9 million also helped. So I think we're on the right way that we're going. I think also too is I have a forensic accounting degree. So it's certain things that I look at that maybe the normal person would probably look at. And so when I bring these things and then they come full speed, we had no idea about the American Rescue Plan and the identity theft that President Biden was gonna put in place. And we had already initiated the fraud awareness training and it's set up and people have already started. So it showed we were on the right track and seeing these things before. And then, like I said, the history from OPM and being there during the breach and making sure, you know, I had to set up 22 million to get the identity and the monitoring to protect their credit. So I think we're still moving forward. We're still working with CIO. We meet with CIO, I think, on a bi-weekly basis. The Bureau CFOs meet with me on the chair of the council, and we talk about different initiatives. All OI, which is any type of changes to the systems or any type of software, we make sure that they come through me so I can see what they are, because something that helps one division, one bureau could help the other division. And so we can make better decisions. And I think we were not operating like that. So I think COVID has helped us to move forward and collaborating a little bit more. I think the incident that we had helped us too, but I think we're in a better place than where we are. And I think we're still evolving with this technology and still moving forward. So that's kind of the nutshell of where we are right now. And, you know, I hope that kind of give you a sense of how huge this is for us. When you talk about 12 regions, we can go in Colorado, Washington State, you know, to anywhere, we're everywhere. And so thinking about that and then thinking about our various different missions, you know, it puts us, you know, what I would call us, I used to call us is where we can't find somewhere a different mission should go, just drop it at Interior. That's what I used to say. Because we, you know, we go from everywhere and we do. And when you think about it in that context. And so there is no one specific mission, you know, we deal with, Bureau of Indian Affairs is under us too. You know, our secretary is, you know, we have the first Native American secretary. So making sure that we cover all aspects and have the technology, we have to have that communication. We can't work in silos. And so that is kind of how we're moving right now. And change management is never easy, like I said. And so that has probably been one of the most challenging, because everybody's, I want to do this and I want to do this. And I was like, no, we have to think about the department as a whole. What works best for all of us? You know, how can we protect you? So.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you all for to go. There's so much that we can cover in terms of security, in terms of experience, both from a citizen to an employee, staff. I'd love to get into kind of, you know, moving. How do you scale to the complexity and scope that you were talking about, Kashid? So, Richard, I'm going to spin back to you. Let's start with from what we just heard from Tanya, security, frictionless user experience. So I think that is one of the, you know, biggest challenges that, you know, agencies face, certainly, you know, within the regulatory and global financial space. You know, security is top of mind as well, and building that credibility and trust that Howard was talking about earlier. But can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing from how organizations are, ensuring the security of their systems while also providing frictionless customer experience, I like to refer to.
Yeah, that's a challenge everyone faces. I think the three examples here are really perfect along those lines, especially Tanya's, really illustrative example of some of the complexities of how to address, particularly around cybersecurity and fraud effects. But we also, and this is even more so true in the private sector, right? Because customers are like the Department of Interior everywhere. But this is exactly where digital transformation has a huge benefit and impact. But I think Tanya highlighted this very well, is the security needs to be sort of continuous. It needs to be integrated. It needs to be very agile and flexible in this sort of digital world. And, whether you're on premise or in the cloud, it actually almost doesn't matter, because you still need a consistent set of protection everywhere. But at the same time, as you're moving more and more into the digital world, more and more real time, and I think Tanya's example just highlighted that, there are new ways for criminal actors to find new ways. They're as innovative as we are in everything. And they do use technology too. Unfortunately, they don't pay for it, but so the challenge is very, very important there. But I think also, and if this comes to things around data and privacy, the data security element is also a key part. And then, in other regions, like in Europe, we have GDPR. I think in the US, you have the California sort of privacy regulations. But it's really, deciding where you store your information, how you protect it, what systems you're using. I mean, the IRS has, the description was, like you were saying, you never sleep. So the kinds of systems that are, very siloed and disparate, no matter how much modernization you do, the security element becomes really, really core, because all three of your agencies, you're keeping, in some sense, the most secret information from the citizens, your customers. And I think that's an element that we focus a lot of our time as Red Hat on, to ensure that anything we build, from an open source perspective, has that consistent, holistic enterprise view of security. But you have to be, and I think Tanya, really vigilant, right? Just because you think you've covered every angle, guaranteed there's someone out there trying to figure out a brand new one. Anyway, so I know that's sort of my quick summary.
No, I think that's an excellent follow on. Kashid, I'm going to pivot back over to you. And one of the technology areas that I would love to know what the IRS is been working on is around automation. Because you talk about, I can't imagine that you guys are able to, scale that customer experience. There's only so many contact centers that you can have. How is automation supporting, I guess, both that total experience for both the taxpayer, but also internally to allow your IRS agents that are filing and delivering taxes to focus on more high-end tasks and letting more of those lower-end tasks be produced, and how does that factor into the scale that you guys have experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I address it, I just wanted to stress again the criticality and importance of security. I know the question is around automation, but security is paramount. It's at the forefront of everything, regardless of how quickly we are asked to deliver something. We are never, ever having a conversation where we say, let's circumvent this security measure, right? We rather delay a deployment of a program or an application than to have a weaken our security posture. So security is absolutely critical for us. And we see 1.3, I believe we're averaging about 1.3 billion attacks on us annually. that works out to about 3.5 million attacks on us a day. So we know that we are a target for the cybersecurity criminals, and naturally so. We have very, very critical and important information and data. So everything we do, we start with security first. The phrase we use internally is baked in, not bolted on. So it's never an afterthought. So pivoting to automation, you're absolutely right, James. It's automation is huge for us. It's a key area and focus for us from a modernization perspective, and rightfully so. As complex as our systems are, we know that we can gain efficiencies through automation to improve the overall experience, both for us internally and for the external taxpayers, businesses, vendors, etc. And we are, as part of our modernization plan, the one that I mentioned a little bit earlier, that was released in 2019, one of our key areas is automation. Whether we call it RPA, robotic process automation, or we refer to it as AI or machine learning, all of these are key for us to modernize as we move towards the future state of what IRS looks like. So we are looking at this as an enterprise approach. Certainly the modernization and automation, there's a lot of interest across and within the IRS. As we work with individual business units and functional units, they all know the areas that they are feeling the pain in, because either shortage from the number of people, or simply the volume that exists is unmanageable with the processes that currently exist, the manual processes. So we're looking at each of those areas, but we also recognize that automation for us has to be a more holistic and enterprise approach rather than individual solutions. We don't want to find ourselves in a position where we have solved 50 different individual problems, and now we are operating or managing 50 different solutions, right? So we're looking at it from, as I said, across the IRS, but as an enterprise solution. We are heavily focused on legacy reduction. We're heavily focused on footprint reduction. And therefore, we are containing how we deploy and manage automation. That's not to say we are curbing the opportunities or the path forward. We just want to do it sensibly. So what are we doing? I mentioned everything from some things like customer callbacks to integrated voice responses. Again, taking a page from our personal experiences, when I call my bank, for example, they will give me a menu of options, right? They recognize who I am because they know the phone number I'm calling in on is the phone number I've registered with them, and then they already know my account. They can now help me. My credit card companies can help me directly. That type of automation will ease the burden on the taxpayers calling in, rather than us having to identify or ask them to validate their identity. We will know who they are, and then they can navigate through the right areas. I want to know how much my refund was. I want to know how much I owe. I want to know if I'm qualified for the child tax credit. All of that is through our integrated voice response. The other area we're looking at and actually have deployed, I would say a great deal of automation, is in our procurement space. Prior to what we just recently deployed, and recent is probably last year, but nonetheless, before a vendor can work with us, we need to ensure that they are tax compliant, right? So we don't want to, of course, give a contract to somebody who hasn't paid their fair share of taxes. So in order for us to validate the compliancy, our teams had to manually go and research the vendor's compliancy, right? We had to make sure that they were compliant with everything that they were supposed to within the vendor community and within the required rules and regulations. For each vendor coming in for us to evaluate used to take us 3 days. One person, 3 days, one vendor. We last year deployed a automation solution using UiPath, and again, leveraging the benefits and that the cloud provides, faster deployments, the elasticity to scale as we need to. We changed that 3-day time to 5 minutes, 3 days to 5 minutes. So for us, that level of automation clearly has demonstrated the benefits of automation. Now those individuals can focus their time on all of the other work that was piling up for them, but also look for new opportunities on how they can also train themselves and work and improve, whether it's customer relationships or just our internal processes. Internally, looking internally within IT, we are and have been a DevOps shop since 2016. And again, our complexity makes it challenging. I always imagine the picture that was shown to me when we first engaged and embarked on DevOps. We have multiple systems providing input or deployment or change requests into our systems. And it looks like a bowl of spaghetti. Right? It's just, we don't know where something is coming in, where something is going out, and it becomes impossible to untangle. Through our DevOps and Agile methodologies, we have now improved our automation. We have taken deployment times down from 27 days to 3 days. We have introduced automation in how we build servers. It used to take us 30 days to build a server from scratch, even the virtual servers, because of all of the necessary security that we had to apply pre and post, all of the, I would say, configurations, all of the agents, et cetera, and et cetera. Right now, we're averaging 2 days to build a server. So we're applying automation across to help out the external taxpayers and taxpayer community, as well as inwardly focusing on improving efficiencies and effectiveness of how our teams are able to do their jobs. And we know automation is the future. We recognize it, and we are aggressively migrating to automate where and what we can, doing so sensibly, right? I always want to drop that in. It's like saying cloud first, and I always add my two additional words, cloud smart, along with it. It's not just for the sake of doing something, it's doing so knowing the derived benefits and value from doing so.
No, thank you. So Howard, kind of pivoting over to you and taking those two areas, security, and I also want to hear what you guys have been doing around or how you're looking to potentially enable or implement AI, ML, automation tools and capabilities to help, deliver on the mission. But starting with security, has the pandemic and the recent attacks over the past 12 months, we read about them in the news every day, has it changed your guys' approach to security?
As I mentioned, I think it's accelerated some things that we were doing. Obviously, from my earlier comments, the ability to manage actually physically distributed desktops that aren't sitting on a dedicated network where we know the throughput and ability has affected things like patch processes and ensuring that patches are getting out to machines that may be sitting on the end of a Wi-Fi, and that Wi-Fi may be turned off. So one of the metrics we look at is if we have a fleet and we have a critical patch on the fleet, how long does it take to get 100% coverage, right? And that type of activity has become elongated now that the fleet is primarily distributed versus most of that fleet sitting in-house. And that's where technology like desktop virtualization basically pulls the whole fleet virtually back into servers. So when you have certain critical patches, you can ensure with reliability that you're going to get 100% of your desktops because they're no longer physically distributed. The only thing that's distributed is the access point to that desktop. So you can think of the pandemic basically changed the requirements that we were optimizing around in terms of how we perform certain cyber activities. And then when we look at sort of the increase in attacks and the type of attacks and where the attacks are coming from, and what parts of the stack are they coming at servers? Are they coming at desktops? Are they coming through process? Are they coming through through supply chain? One of the things, and this builds, I think, on what Kashif was saying, is if we don't kind of simplify this world, our ability to secure this world becomes incredibly challenging. So I think that's one of the lenses that we look at security very carefully at, is how can we use modernization and sort of the implied technology frameworks in modernization to take an increasingly complex world and on some routine basis actually simplify that world versus simply accreting more and more complexity. So we pay close attention to technical debt and making sure that we're retiring technical debt and pruning the applications and asking, why are we doing this with 3 vendors? Because this vendor has accreted these requirements and now we can pull it all back into one vendor. So we look at sort of hygiene, technology trends, and one of the questions we're asking, in addition to sort of capabilities that maybe customers or staff directly experience, how can we use that to simplify our world? To come to your second question on things like AI and ML, those are not, at least at this point, major technologies that sort of change our world with respect to our particular mission. So we deal with a relatively small amount of high value transactions. So if we compared sort of the transaction sort of metrics of an XM versus an IRS, we're in vastly different spaces. So to a large extent, you know, when you talk about cloud, you talk about loads. And one of the things that we look at internally is, well, what kind of sort of staff loads and processing loads, you know, what is the actual fundamental nature of the activity we do? And if you kind of look at XM, it actually looks a lot like a law firm in terms of the core activity that's sort of happening here. There's relatively little activity that's happening in classic transaction systems, and there's a lot of activity happening in sort of that office automation, in that office automation space. And so what we find when we look at loads is that, and this relates to my point about sort of outreach and culture, is we put an incredible amount of power into that office automation space between, if you look at a modern version of Office and how it integrates with Office 365 and how it integrates with Teams and stuff like SharePoint. And so where we think we can bring a lot of value is, how do we talk to staff? How do we encourage staff? How do we do outreach to staff to talk about how they can reimagine how they work with the existing technology tools, right, to gain significant efficiency? And how can we kind of push those norms into the organization? A simple example of simply developing a document. Do you develop a document and do you email it to 5 colleagues to get their input on, and then try to, you know, personally integrate all of their feedback? Or do you post it into a common place and use shared editing tools that are available in that office environment that are really, you know, those tools are there now. You can do multiple people editing on a document. It works now. It's ready for prime time. But if you kind of look at our workforce, we have some folks who are very comfortable with that. We have some folks who are either not comfortable to that or haven't been exposed to that. And so I think for us, when we look at our workloads, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of how people collaborate with one another, because there's sort of personal productivity, but there's sort of collaborative efficiency. So how I work actually affects the efficiency of how other people work. And I think that's where we're looking at how do we bring that sort of norm building, culture building, training and outreach to get to make sure that those tools are being used at the capability that they're capable of delivering.
No, thank you for that detail, Howard. And so kind of sticking with the workload concept, Richard, I'd love to hear from you. And I know we're coming up against time, so I'd love to hear from you on the thought that I'm having right now, but then I'd just like to go around the room, our virtual room here, and just get, 60-second, what advice do you have for agencies, whether they're in the, depending on where you are in your financial modernization efforts and initiatives, and there's lots of them, which is, I love to hear the work that is happening, but maybe, just wherever you are, what advice you have for other agencies that are, watching this right now. But Richard, I want to hear from you and thinking through workloads and how does cloud help enable all of this, in terms of migrating, on-prem to a public or just having a hybrid type of environment. Where does cloud fit into, supporting legacy infrastructure, enabling some of these capabilities? Oop, you're on mute, sir. Apologies.
So in the banking sector, there's been a significant investment in shift, and I think the biggest challenge that most institutions have is around migrating into the cloud. And is it lift and shift? You develop natively in the cloud. You develop containerized environments. But I see sort of the challenges that most institutions sort of face is coming up with a well-defined cloud strategy, but most importantly, a migration strategy. Then also there's this whole thing we've talked extensively about, sort of data security and compliance risk, because that actually limits what you can do in the cloud in many cases. And I think there's also a great uncertainty we've seen with a lot of our banking customers in particular around the cost of this. It sounds very simple that this is, you'll save 50, 60, 70%. But when people look at the total cost of ownership, sometimes it can be a little shocking to them, particularly the cost of migrating. And then, I think everyone, no matter what industry, whether it's public sector, private, there's a shortage of cloud skills. And that's also a big challenge that people face. So I would say, those four things that we see challenges, which will be, I'm sure the colleagues here, the public sector will sort of say probably have similar experiences.
Yeah, thank you. So let's just go around so we can wrap up. Tanya, I'll start with you. 60, 90 seconds. Everything that we've heard so much, right? So there's so much advice that we can offer to the listeners here today and viewers here today of, depending on if they're thinking through their security strategy and architecture, or thinking through how to migrate to the cloud, or thinking through, just internal operations and processes, from your lens. Let's just take it from your lens. What advice can you have as agencies are thinking through a myriad of modernization initiatives right now? What is some practical advice that you could offer? I mean, I think what you've done in a very short period at DOI with the disparate, organization that you have is a great first step. So what is some advice that you'd offer to our viewers?
I think one of the things that I would definitely say is get best practices. Talk to the different areas for us, for Department of Interior. Like I said, we have 11 different bureaus. If we're not communicating, so we don't know everything that's going on, we can't help. And so when it comes to security of the system, or you're looking at data visualizations or data management, or whatever you're looking at from data, you got to have the conversation to understand what the need, what the mission is specifically, and make sure you have the security and controls in place. And I think you have to allow yourself to move forward with change management. I think that is one of the biggest issues that we will face. But not only that, I think you have to reach across agencies. I think one of the things that we do well at the CFOC Council is the CFOs, we talk to each other. We try to figure out what's happening at Treasury versus what happens at DOD, and see if we can implement some of those. Some of the things I wrote down UPath that Kashif spoke of. So I'm going to look at that for us. And so I think you have to be able to explore the opportunities to help get everybody there. So that would be my sum up in 60 minutes. Have the communication, make sure you don't operate in silos, and reach out to other agencies and other counterparts to see what they're doing to kind of how to combat some of the fraud. Make sure you have the tools that you need to do data transformation and be secure in the audit. Because I will tell you, auditors are going to the cloud now. They're looking at data in the cloud. So it's not something that you want to do. It's something that we will all be moving forward to. So.
Thank you, Tana. Kashif?
So I'll say everything that Tanya just mentioned. I'm in complete agreement and alignment too, and I'll use the opportunity to build on that a little bit. For us, security is paramount. I mentioned it earlier. We are a target. We will remain a target because of what we do, and therefore security always will be the first thing we look at in everything we do. So whether it's on-prem, off-prem, in the cloud, we're not going to accelerate and move to the cloud as much as we'd like to get to the cloud if it compromises security. So security for us is absolutely, absolutely critical and important because we are in the business of protecting all of ours, all of yours tax data. And there are a lot of people out there who want access to it. So that's one. Two is data strategy. I think data ultimately will be sometimes depends on where and what you hear, but data is the new asset. It's the new oil. That's what I've been hearing recently. Data will help drive all of the, I would say, modernization that we are looking for and that a lot of the agencies are looking to do. Automation is driven by data. Machine learning, AI, all of that has an underlying dependency on data. So have a robust and meaningful and executable data strategy. And the last one is footprint reduction. We are heavily focused on footprint reduction. The reason being, while we might be able to say, and while outside people looking in might say, well, IT has a budget of $3 billion. How is it that you are not able to do everything you want to do? Well, our O&M eats up 80% of that budget. Right? That leaves us with very little available funds to take on and modernize as we need to, unless we get funding from the government, right? The Congress, Hill, whatever we want to refer to them as. Our focus on footprint reduction is to shrink that O&M cost down so we free up the funding available to help us modernize. And in that case, whether it's cloud or reducing the number of tools we have, migrating from legacy system to modernize, all comes back to how are we going to now reduce our footprint and free up more funds for us to now take them and apply them to modernization efforts. So I think footprint reduction is going to be key for all government agencies.
I think that's an excellent point. Howard?
Yeah, well, first of all, I certainly echo everything Tanya and Kashif have said. I would add one of the things that we focused on is a lot of collaboration at the C-suite level at XM. Look, technology is a huge part of any financial services entity. Oftentimes, it might also be the lion's share of administrative costs that a financial services agency can be directly tied to IT. And so we've got, I think, a very sharp focus, in addition to everything that's been discussed here, on integrated planning and roadmaps, and really paying very close attention to the fundraising type of activity that's required to support modernization. We have tried to bring more discipline to the process of ensuring that we actually understand full life cycle costs before pulling the trigger, and that we've got the money lined up. And then also to have strategies to navigate certain risks that I think in public sector entities are pretty challenging, of like, well, what budget are you going to get? Any particular year may not be the budget. Can we take a big project and can we chunk it down into valuable elements? And so if we don't get the funding that we want, we can still deliver valuable elements, and maybe we push some stuff out to the right, but it doesn't make us have to restart or stop a whole project. So we focused a lot on sort of risk management and planning type of stuff that we've found has paid big dividends in terms of allowing us to bring more of our project portfolio, actually from start to a successful finish, and that we're managing sort of the incumbent risks that occur in any public agency without those without those risks becoming sort of a stake through the heart of a modernization effort.
No, thank you very much for that. Richard, bring us home.
I would love to thank all three of you. This is a fantastic discussion. I've actually learned a lot in this process too, and I hope the audience will learn as well. And particularly to James, thank you very much for sort of all the research your group has done around this topic, as well as helping to sort of moderate and get these incredible insights from three very important agencies in the U.S. government.
No, thank you. I think we could probably have this conversation for another hour for sure, but unfortunately we're out of time and we got to give our audience a little time back. But I want to thank all of you for your participation today, lending your time, lending your insights. Thank you for your service to our great nation and the work that you and your teams do every day. I do want to thank Red Hat for bringing us together and helping facilitate conversations like this. For GovExec and NextGov, I'm James Hansen. We'll see you next time. Keep an eye out for, we'll be sending out an email to our audience. Please share this among your own organizations. This is great information, and insight. So thank you all again.